Okay.
All right. Well, welcome back after a week off. The good news is the meeting that met on Tuesdays, I am no longer a part of that committee. So that was the last first Tuesday we have to miss.
Right. That is good news.
Yes.
This will move along a little faster. It might take 1.5 years instead of 2 years.
Indeed. Well, we are actually if you like doing a little bit of a retrospective, if you think about how far we've been in Genesis, we're actually coming to the end of part 3. The first part kind of being that initial setup, a lot of the mythology. We have Abraham, and now we're in episode 3 dealing with Jacob. And this is really where Jacob's story is really coming to a close and kind of repeating some of the stuff that happened at the beginning. So today we are going to wrestle with chapter 32. And it has 2 main episodes. One is a setup for what happens in 33, and then there's the chunk at the end, which is agreed upon that it is ambiguous of what's actually happening. So just to bring us back up to speed with where we are, we left off last time with Jacob basically saying, okay, I've had it. I'm done. The family I've been living with, they're starting to get grumpy at me. I think it's time that I go back to where I came from. He hears a message from God that says, go home. And so he decides it is best to leave without telling his father-in-law Laban. They hit the road. Laban finds out, pursues them. They have a little fight, like a verbal fight of why they left. But then they threw a party. And then at the very end, verse 55 of chapter 31, early in the morning, Laban rose, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, blessed them, and then he departed and returned home. So that's the last we're going to see of Laban. The Laban part of the cycle has been completed. His time there has come to an end. He is now a fairly rich man heading back to where he came from. And so this chapter starts out with, okay, let's go back and I need to talk to my brother. And so he sends a messenger ahead of him and basically sends a message to Esau of like, I'm heading your way. So what do you think I want some initial ideas or thoughts from you all about what you think Jacob is thinking, his preparations, this whole setup, this whole anticipation for meeting his brother Esau. What's going through your head as he's setting up all of this whole situation?
Well, I was trying to figure out whether it was really great strategy on his part to split up his group into 2, or is it going to be a mistake? You know, is it going to backfire on him? That was to me a surprise of that strategy.
But hadn't God reassured Jacob that if he went back to his homeland, he would be safe, that God would protect him? And this sort of sounds like Jacob saying, well, you know, maybe I better have plan B, you know, to protect myself. And that he's not entirely trusting what he's been told by God.
Right.
Go for it.
I think his guilt about what he did to his brother is certainly, he's telling himself really scary stories about what's going to happen, and it's I think it's probably managing his guilt. He's a trickster, so he might retaliate, but he doesn't. So he assumes that Esau will, and we don't know what Esau's going to do. We don't. He's settled in Canaan and probably, you know, done pretty well. Maybe Jacob doesn't know that.
Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Yeah, part of, you know, playing off what Sue said, Jacob didn't know how Esau would react. And usually if there's going to be a negative reaction, a big, if Esau goes into a major meltdown over the fact that Jacob is coming back, it's much better to let him have that meltdown off scene. Let him have that meltdown, let him get that out. And then when things are a little calmer, they can meet. And I think Jacob was, really quite smart to divide his herd, to send things on ahead to Esau. I loved reading what he possessed, because finally got some detail about the wives, the children, and how much livestock. He was an extremely wealthy man. If he could divide his herds and then still give such a generous gift to Esau. And I mean, the planning, the dividing of the sheep from the goats, and how I just loved it. I loved how that story evolved with Jacob's thinking, and I'm totally behind him in this one. I thought he did a good job.
Did he not cheat his uncle out of some of his goats and kind of budge a little bit there? And then when the two boys split, they were not splitting because it was a friendly thing. They were splitting because there was sort of a war there.
Right. So there's a lot of dynamics, and you all have picked up on a lot of the different pieces of it. So let's kind of pick through some of these ideas, because Joanne, yeah, you bring up a great thing to keep in mind of, like, Jacob and Esau, when they split, Esau was trying to kill Jacob. There is no understanding that, like, anything would have changed. And Jacob is now leaving his family-in-law equally not under the best pretenses. They were not exactly happy with him. So he's stuck between two places that theoretically he's not left on the best terms in either place. It is an interesting thought to think about his planning, though, because yeah, there's a lot of foresight, or like he's like reasoning through all of this. And this is once again where we see kind of the very witty, the very like, how can I outsmart them? And the question is with this one, because Larry, you brought up an excellent question of, does he trust God? And his story is always an interesting layering of, is God working with him or for him? Because there's a certain point where Jacob is like witty and trying to like outwit people and get ahead. And the question is God somehow in that process? Is he working and not helping God? Or is like, are these two separate things? Or does he say, I'm going to make this plan and God's going to help the plan work? Or is it that I'm going to ignore what God says? I have to protect myself. Yeah, Mary Ellen.
Or God could have guided him in this plan.
Or that.
We don't know. What is that? I've forgotten who said it, but it's like, trust in God and work like hell, something. I don't know. Is that Niebuhr?
I don't know, but it's kind of that thought. Like, yes, you trust that like the plan will come through in the end, but it's not like a magic something that's just gonna like happen. We have it's the thought that we have agency and like we're going to put the plan in action. It's just we trust that it's going to work out in the end. So yeah, one of the things, so few details to pull out to just fully get like all of the nuance that's happening in this story, because this story has a lot of like details. So I want you all to look at verse 4. So this is when Jacob is about to send out the two messengers. Well, roll back just a moment. In verse 1, we see Jacob went on his way and two angels of God met him. Always remember, angels and messengers are the same word. So it could also read two messengers of God went to Jacob and said, God is in this camp. And so he names the camp. There's a thought that these two messengers may have inspired the thought to send a messenger of his own ahead of himself, because that's essentially what God did here. God sent two messengers and just to announce that, like, God's in this place. And then in the next one, it's like, oh, so Jacob sent messengers.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's just a cool little language thing. But the message that he sends is, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, say that your servant Jacob. That's very specific language there. And I'm wondering if it conjures anything from what we've read in the past. Calling Esau Lord and Jacob saying your servant.
Well, isn't that how they left it 20 years ago?
Say more.
Well, Esau was in charge of everything and Jacob had left. So Esau was the Lord. So is he phrasing that purposely as they left things 20 years ago?
So, yes.
The father,
no. Larry, what's up?
well, I was thinking when Jacob outwitted Esau by pretending to be Esau, you know, and he was asked by his father, are you, you know, I think he says, I am your son, you know, which is true, but he was assuming a false identity.
Yeah, and in that moment, Jacob technically stole the title. He stole the blessing, he stole the birthright. So if you think of it in the technical sense, no, Jacob's the one who would be the technical Lord because he stole those two things. But if you also remember when they were wrestling in the womb, his mother goes and says, what's going on? My belly's in like a ruckus state. And they said, you have two nations inside of you, and the younger shall lord over the older, and the older shall serve the younger. So this is an echo of that prophecy, and it's an intentional subversion. Jacob has been a jerk, and he's saying, my lord, which actually is putting the honorific on the brother he stole the honor from. Yeah, Mary Ellen.
He's also humbling himself and announcing to Esau that he does not come with the plan to take over and take his the birthright that he stole from Esau. He's really, you know, trying to go low key and, you know, just kind of cool Esau down if he's angry, and just kind of, you know, slide into the meeting or the gathering. I don't know what's coming next, but you know, he's really just kind of like, don't get mad at me, I'm coming as your servant, I'm not coming in war, I'm not coming to try and take over. You know, just kind of easing on in there.
Yeah.
Does this work as does it work as an apology?
No.
I think it's almost like a ploy when you're about to go into a conflict. You want to throw your opponent off, and so you pay tribute to him or her or whatever, you know, by making these comments. He's concerned, so they're just words, so he throws them out there, compliment his brother, or by changing his position.
Then he throws in a few goats.
Right. Well,
Right.
yeah, combination of, physical things and also complementing or establishing a position of being subservient. How do you get angry about that?
Huh, then you're saying kind of he's manipulative. This is a manipulation to,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's a
Gets it,
survivor.
it'll get him what he wants,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully.
Right. So,
It sets the stage for whatever comes next.
mm-hmm. Right. And so he is posturing himself in an interesting way, but he is very much humbling himself. This is not the same Jacob that left.
Jeez.
Anyway, so he announces that I'm coming. I've lived in the with Laban as an alien and stayed until now. He announces he has oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female slaves. My assumption here is that's kind of saying, I'm not coming to claim your stuff. I have my own stuff. Thank you very much. And I've sent to tell my Lord in order that I may find favor in your sight. So that's kind of posturing himself as a dog coming with its tail between its legs. It's saying like, hi, don't be mad. But it's very much a humbled position. The interesting thing is the response then. In the next verse, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. So he's not waiting for Jacob to come all the way in. He is going out to meet him with 400 men with him.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think of not just your brother's coming to meet you, not like your brother's moving his caravan to meet you, your brother is coming with 400 men. What kind of image does that conjure up at this point?
War.
War?
It's ready for war.
So what other stories have we heard where like a man comes with this many men? Because we've heard this phrase before.
Well,
So
then
Justin.
Levan, yeah, he approached with a certain number of men or battalions or whatever.
Yeah, just the story before when Jacob goes, like, is all of a sudden takes the whole family and his stuff. Let's see, where is that? Yeah, Laban comes with his men.
Yes.
Do we have a number for that? Okay, it just says kinfolk. But if you remember, when Abraham went to go save Lot, that was another situation where Abraham and blank number of men went to go save Lot. Like, this almost sounds like a declaration of war. Your brother's coming with a lot of people. Get ready, kind of a thing. So with that kind of like, this sounds like a fight brewing. Jacob hatches this plan that we've already mentioned. Notably, the notes say that there is actually 2 versions of the plan. If you thought it sounded a little weird, it's because this is once again where they took 2 sources and kind of just put them together. So the first idea in the story is the one where you divide the group in 2. And this is where Jacob says, I'll send the first one ahead. If they get attacked, we're just going to flee in the other direction. So we're going to split it in 2. If he means for war, Jacob isn't planning to fight. Evidently, he doesn't think he can overpower Esau. He's just like, they're going to flee and hopefully my wives and my children will be okay. So what do we think of plan number 1?
Scared. He's scared and he's unsure what's going to happen. And he's trying to have a plan B in place. If he survives the initial encounter, with Esau, then he has this backup plan.
So plan number 2 starts at verse 13. That's kind of when you see the transition between the two. With the language, they assume one is, if you're used to the sources, we have a J source and an E source, which means these are likely 2 different traditions from the upper and lower kingdoms. So this one says that his plan is instead he took a present for his brother Esau. So not splitting it into 2 groups and sending one ahead. But this one, he takes 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, 10 male donkeys. So this is an enormous present. And Mary Ellen, I think your point of, if this is a present, how many other things does he have?
Right.
And so he puts this gift in the hands of the servants, puts space between him and the servants, and then his plan is he's gonna send one group ahead of the other. So not just 2 groups. His plan is for about 4 groups here. And it's like, you're gonna see the gift, and you're gonna say, this is a gift, Jacob's behind me, and then they're gonna see another one and say, oh, this isn't Jacob yet, this is party number 1, and just one by one they're gonna pass by, and Jacob's just gonna be at the very end of the party, and so they're gonna see one thing after another, and there's gonna be basically 4 groups.
And this, he's continually appeasing Esau. If Esau is coming with war in mind, he keeps getting these gifts, which hopefully will soften his attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this one is like, we're gonna send the Macy's Day Parade to just slowly soften him and we're not gonna put war troops out front. We're just gonna send gift after gift after gift, and hopefully he's not mad.
Or won't be mad by the time they actually meet.
Mm-hmm. So of these 2 plans, they're notably different. One is 2 and one is waves of gifts. Which one do you think is the better plan?
I like the big gift. The one in verse 14 and on that. It's kind of overwhelming to receive all of those. I mean, just 200 female goats is a big gift. And adding all of this to it, if I were Esau, I would be really kind of wondering what my brother's motives were. And, kind of, well, he's giving me a lot of wealth here, with no guarantee of any return. So I kind of like that one first.
Well, the first plan of splitting into 2 and sending one out to meet Esau leaves all the decision-making up to Esau. I mean, he's either going to attack what is coming towards him or not. Whereas by sending all these presents, this gives at least Jacob, a chance of appeasing his brother so that the end isn't war.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I noticed was that the gift doesn't include the human slaves. But so he's holding back his half of his people, or more than half, because he takes all the slaves. There is a similarity. He still has a 3rd plan, which is run and take the rest of his wealth with him.
Right. There still is a possibility. It still does leave open that, like, if we send all the animals ahead, we at least have the people and we can run. You're right. That is still a 3rd possibility for it being open.
Right.
So the plan is in place. We kind of have to I haven't read ahead, so I actually am forget if they will try to like smush both answers or both solutions into the resolution of it. But we have a pause here for one of the more mysterious elements of this story, where we do once again have the half of the, in one version of the story, Jacob goes across, and the other one, he sends everything ahead, but he stays on the other side of the river. And that's kind of where this episode takes place. So Jacob has sent everything over, but evidently he wants some time for himself. We don't know, but out of nowhere, Jacob is left alone and a man wrestles with him until daybreak. We get no setup for this story. It's just all of a sudden Jacob's alone and then he's wrestling. We're not given an identity. Even by the end of the story, the identity is ambiguous. But we have this whole scene of Jacob wrestling, which one could assume like maybe it was a mental wrestling, except for this conversation that's happening, where neither of them is being overpowered. No one's winning. It lasts all night long. And the only way that the partner gets an edge on Jacob is he touches his hip and throws his hip out of socket. And even still, Jacob's not letting go. The stubborn man is holding on and saying, "Bless me, I'm not letting go." And the partner is like, it's daybreak, come on, let me go. And then they have this whole conversation where Jacob insists on the blessing, and this is where Jacob's name gets changed, where no longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and humans and have prevailed. So this is the introduction of the name and title of Israel, and he kind of becomes this archetype for the nation of Israel at the same time. So the rest of the story might be, or hold on, because Jacob will be called Israel for basically the rest of the story.
Okay.
Anyways, Jacob walks away saying, "Wow, I must have wrestled God and survived." And he names the place saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." If we remember, it is assumed that if you look at God, your head's gonna explode, basically. People thought that you couldn't look at the face of God and live. However, the whole story is ambiguous, whether this is like, Yahweh, like literally, like as we've seen God just like walking around, or if this is an angel speaking on behalf of God. There's a lot of questions here because this scene is kind of weird. So with that overview, what's on your all's mind about this whole wrestling match?
This would be Larry saying, "What is the purpose of having this story here?" I was paying more attention to the joint, and now we don't eat the joint, the flesh around the joint. And I was thinking, oh, the priestly people are in there again. But I don't know if that's true.
Oh, that's 100% true. Yeah, the priests are like, yes, and by the way, this is why we don't do that. So we get a little bit of explanation of a cultural thing. We don't eat the meat around the joint because of this.
Is that true still? I never heard that.
But, well, they talk about the law being, you can't have the sciatic nerve in the meat. And of course, the nerve is separate from the meat. You can easily, take that sciatic nerve out. It's a big nerve, it's bigger than your finger, about the size of your finger.
Oh,
yeah, that you can take that. So, it says they don't eat the muscle or the meat, but then they say, no, all you gotta do is take the nerve out and then it's okay.
that say that?
Oh, they probably didn't know that the sciatic nerve was a nerve then. Mine did not say that, but I wouldn't doubt that if that actually makes sense that they're talking about the sciatic nerve.
Yeah.
with kosher laws, it always depends on how observant of a person you have. If you have someone that observes strict kosher, 100% they will still observe this.
Mhm.
Okay.
So what
And
do
I
you
guess that refers to any animal.
Mhm.
You know, it's not, everybody knows Jewish people don't eat pork, but I never heard anything about the sciatic nerve until I read.
That's interesting. Can you take care of people's sciatica by taking it out that way?
Sure, they wouldn't
pull the
walk
nerve
anymore
out?
because they don't have the nerve.
That would be really
for the
nice.
muscles.
But rewinding, so yeah, we have a little bit of like priestly explanation of dietary laws here that kind of just gets interjected in. But what do you think of the idea of wrestling? So, to pull this, because this connects back around, like I said, Jacob's life, everything that happens at the beginning happens at the end. If you want to flip back a few pages and put your thumb there, you will see in chapter 28, which is when Jacob is leaving the land. Jacob has a godly moment with Jacob has a godly moment with Jacob's ladder. He sleeps on a rock and he sees the angels going up and down and up and down. And he wakes up and is like, well, God must be in the land. Great. And now that he's coming back into the land, he has this another kind of like godly holy moment, but instead of seeing the angels, he's wrestling with one. So the idea of wrestling, there's a interesting pun with this one. Like once again, going to the Hebrew, wrestling is like there in this verse, it's very clear they are like tumbling and like classic wrestling. But it's a pun because Jacob's name, Jacob, kind of is, if you remember from his birth story, it's like he is the usurper, he's the wrestler, he is the striving one. So it's kind of Jacob is Jacobing.
Well, and he came out of the womb hanging on to his brother's ankle.
Uh-huh. And the name of the location is Jabbok, which is the same root word. So Jacob is Jacobing in the area of Jacob. So this is kind of like the most Jacob thing he can do, because he seems to do this everywhere he goes with everyone he meets. Jacob is constantly wrestling. And so he's wrestled with his brother and stolen the blessing because he fought with him. He fooled his dad and kind of wrestled a blessing out of him. He wrestled wits with Laban and like came out on top, and now he's wrestling God. So he's kind of wrestled and outwitted and trickstered everyone around, and now he's doing it to God. So Jacob is once again Jacobing. Does that make that story make a little bit more sense thinking about it like that?
But you know, we use wrestle in another way, which we say we wrestle with that belief. I'm wrestling with my faith. I'm, and that's has a slightly different connotation.
So can that still apply in this story? If you think about it less like Jacob is wrestling an entity, which the story kind of implies, but what would Jacob be wrestling with in his own mind?
Well, I thought that maybe he was wrestling with the fact that he wasn't comfortable with God saying he was going to be safe, and he went through all the shenanigans of dividing up and giving the great gifts and so forth. He might have been wrestling with the fact that he should have more faith in what God had told him, just forward and met his brother.
Yeah. Mary Ellen.
Everything that we've seen with Jacob is Yes, he tricked his brother out of the inheritance and the blessing, but he's been second fiddle this whole time. He's always been subservient to someone else. All the time with Laban, whatever. And now he's approaching his brother, and he is accepting the subservient role, although whether that's honest or not, I don't know yet. But he's always second fiddle, and he's fighting to, keep his head above water through all these years, because he was promised that he would be the leader, and it hasn't happened yet. So, he's manipulating, he's maneuvering, he's negotiating, he's, all of these words, trying to stay in a position where he can become the leader of nations.
But
Yeah.
in all of these encounters, he ends up on top.
Yes, but he's
wins.
still second fiddle.
He wins.
So yeah, I think while this is kind of described in a very physical, like in the a physical moment where it does seem like there's two people, two entities that are doing this, it does seem reflective of this inner turmoil that he's facing. Whether it's like, I want to have more faith, but I don't. Whether it's, I keep striving and I keep having to do like double the amount of effort that anyone else is doing. Whether it's like, I'm just like, I am doing all of these things, and he's constantly wrestling. Here we have a moment where like, or I'm sure we all have come to a point where it's like, midnight can be a time of some of the thoughts we struggle with. And so it almost rings like of something that is very plausible when we wrestle with our own thoughts and we're trying to figure out the course of our own life and kind of that kind of a thing. And Jacob ends by being hurt. He is no longer able to wrestle the way he was doing. There is something that's changed about Jacob. Whether it is his experiences are leading him to want a different way, to not have to do that constant striving, or whether in the story it's like his hip gets blown out by a magic touch and literally he cannot walk as well. But Jacob is still like white knuckle clutching at this, saying, bless me. And in that moment, his name changes. Not just from someone who wrestles, someone who Jacobs, someone who is constantly in that trickster role, but to Israel, saying, you have striven with God and humans, and Larry, to your point, you have prevailed. Almost saying, you're no longer the one who is striving, you're the one who has arrived. You have prevailed. And to mark that point in his life where he's no longer second fiddle, as Mary Ellen, as you say, he gets to be the one on top. He gets to be the father of the nation that will bear the name Israel. So this is that transitional moment where he goes from being like a kid to actually being able to fill the role as patriarch as he's been promised.
Now, that is a gift from God, that the name change and all that it signifies. But will man, like his brother, accept that? I mean, what will he be called in the next chapters by the humans in his life?
Write yourself a sticky note and pay attention to it.
Wait and see.
So knowing, or we're kind of at the end of this chapter. I don't exactly want to jump into the actual encounter between Jacob and Esau yet. I will be curious when you read for next, or are we meeting next week? I need to look at my schedule. It's the week of Christmas, but I think we're scheduled to meet next week and not the week after. There we go.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
next week, read about it and see if what you expect happens. But let's because this is that pivotal transitional moment, and we've seen how Jacob's story really is coming around. If you see how things are being repeated, the circle is being drawn, loose ends are being tied up. How have we seen Jacob change? Like, what are some of the big character arc changes that we've seen from the Jacob who is here and now versus the kid who started out the story?
When he left Laban, and Laban chased him, and they met, and Laban was trying to coerce him into coming back and coming back to his role and being an alien in Laban's world. But that Jacob has stood up for himself, and it's like the boy became a man, or the servant became the master, whatever you want. It was a real pivotal point, and now he is continuing on that position. He's trying to take control of his encounter with Esau. He's trying to come out on top on his future, where before he really was acceptant of the subservient role and, paying off his years of work for his wives and his flock, whatever. But to me, that was a real pivotal move for him.
Yeah, Larry?
And well, the methods that he's using seem to me to have changed as well. Before he was very devious. I mean, putting on a wolf's cape in order to fool your poor aged father, isn't a really very nice sort of thing to do. But here now, in this coming to this meeting with Esau, he's going to try to appease him by offering things and so forth. He's, which sounds, at least a little more socially acceptable than the way he'd been operating in the past.
But he's more grown up. He's matured.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still devious.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That won't change.
Uh-huh.
He's always got a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A plan. Something in his back pocket you don't see.
But kind of connecting some of the things that you all were saying, it's a lot of the plans initially were like how to get around a situation, how to kind of move around the thing that he's not supposed to do. Which seems like now he does have a plan, but at least he's addressing the problem head on.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Ellen, I liked what you said about confronting his father-in-law, that yes, he did leave in a less than straightforward way. It's not like he came home and said, Laban, I'm leaving. He did kind of go around skirt the issue still. But when it came to actually addressing it, he finally was able to stand up and say, here's the issue I have. He finally talked about the issue with the person at hand. And now with this problem with Esau, yes, once again, there's a plan, but he's no longer fleeing his brother. It's not like finding out where his brother is and then going to the middle of nowhere away from his brother. He's still he's finally addressing the issues he's caused.
Right.
He's starting to stand up for himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, folks, this might be a shorter one because that's all I have for us today.
Okay,
It's kind of
well,
a prelude into next week, unless you all have some additional thoughts about this story here.
Well, it's a cliffhanger.
It is a
mm.
cliffhanger. I mean, a meaty cliffhanger, though. Like, there's a lot of information.
Yes,
I-
I of course have read ahead.
I have a question about Jacob, and from the beginning, you had said that he was a trickster. And so far, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing, you know,
Okay.
a man who manipulated his situation to try and take control of his own destiny. But I have not seen the trickster. So can you go kind of pull those out and show me where they are?
So this might be a definition problem, or I think my assumption is that's where the difference of opinion is. So can you share with the group what your how you would define a trickster? Like, what are the images or examples that you think of with that, with the connotations of being a trickster?
All negative.
Okay.
That you're manipulating people to your own gain with no thought of what you're doing to them. I mean, I think of the big Wall Street people, the Ponzi schemes, those kind of things that have no thought for the damage you're doing while being getting what you want. So I don't have any positive connotations with the word trickster. And in the Native American culture, it's the coyote is the trickster. And that's where I'm coming from. So
Okay.
help me out here.
All right.
That's interesting.
Very,
Oh,
how do you get past the fact that he tricked his brother or his father when his father was aging and he went through the business of pretending to be his brother with the sheepskin and all that, right? Wouldn't that
Yeah.
fit into a trickster category?
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. That he was
Yeah.
definitely the trickster.
Coloring the sheep.
Or the sheep, what?
When he divided the sheep out that he was going to take.
The
Okay.
spot or the
Spotted
spot-
Spotted ones
That's
and the
flavored.
black ones.
Kind of a little bit iffy, and
Little
we
shady.
haven't finished the story yet.
You think there's more?
I know there's more.
Oh,
I read it.
oh, you read ahead.
I don't know what's coming, but it, in his major moves, like we've just discussed, I actually respect how he handled this. So,
Okay.
yes, but you pointed out some instances where he's been a trickster, like one-on situations, and that helps me kind of put things in alignment. But as his, I don't know what's the word I wanted. As we think about him, I'm not thinking of him in the major role of trickster right now. I'm really kind of respecting the manipulations, the planning, the
mhm.
how he's handling this potential meeting with his brother when he doesn't know how things are going to go.
Mhm.
So that's
Okay.
where my conflict has been.
All right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I will say this, and I thank you for defining explaining what you're thinking, because there is a difference in, I think, interpretation of like what it doesn't mean to be a trickster. So notably, trickster is a term that used to be a lot more neutral, especially when you look at mythology. So one of the mythological characters I think of is from the Norse pantheon, Loki, and how Loki kind of interacts with the god Thor. Loki, when you're talking like mythology and legend, Loki is like the iconic trickster who kind of has that persona. while some interpretations of Loki put him as like the antagonist of the story, he's not in the original tellings of these tales, he's not evil, he's not bad. He's kind of more just a plot device that gets the story going. Yeah, he does things and sometimes gets people in trouble or situations involved, but it's kind of like, oh, that Loki causing some trouble. That's more of the like the way that they talk about it. And he has some harebrained ideas. Like there's one story from the Norse pantheon where someone wants to marry one of the goddesses and the goddess does not want to. So instead, Loki has an idea to dress Thor up like a woman, and then he makes himself look like her handmaiden because he's a shapeshifter. And so Thor has like a fake marriage and has to act like a lady. And that is kind of how Loki is a trickster. He's pulling one over people, but it's not malicious. And so another one is that you see is it's a Caribbean myth of a god named Anansi, who that one has a little bit more of a like malicious edge, but it's still one of those that it's more like a prankster, where he's doing things and like maybe annoying to the gods, but no real harm comes to it. And so that's my experience, is more from like the mythological category, which actually is where the devil, or like the Satan, I've talked about it in a few sermons, where the Satan is an adversary or like the accuser. Satan doesn't get demonized until the New Testament. Beforehand, it's more of this trickster, just kind of instigator like persona, where it gets things going, but it's not malicious and it's not evil.
So the trickster becomes the devil in the New Testament?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's it's actually really fascinating looking at the evolution of how we get to our modern ideas of the devil, because it even like our idea of the devil the way it is today is not just Christianity, but like very much Protestantism kind of made the modern idea of the devil. So there's a lot of iterations that the devil goes through before it's like this all-encompassing evil. Thank Dante's Inferno for that one in part. So a lot of, when we think of like a trickster in like our culture today, Mary Ellen, I think your those connotations that you brought out are what we think about, like trickster, hucksters, snake oil salesman, all of those people who have those connotations of being like self-serving, manipulative, but also like narcissistic and not caring. Mm-hmm. That is kind of more today. Beforehand, it's more, think more like prankster, think more like I'm not malicious, but maybe still manipulative.
Like a leprechaun, or, leprechauns figure into this.
Exactly. Yeah, leprechaun is another good one. Yeah, they're tricksters, but they're not necessarily evil. They're just pulling pranks.
Yeah.
And so that's more the category I put Jacob in, of that more like, I don't mean harm, but I am going to try to get my way. And it's not going to be direct.
Like stealing the blessing.
Right.
Yeah. You cheat your brother out of his birthright. I mean,
that's pretty bad. But it
today, these days, what's your birthright worth? What's the blessing of your parent or somebody else worth,
Yeah.
Wasn't it worth a lot more back in biblical times,
Yeah. So why this I think is good to differentiate is because there's a few times that I've said that the nation of Israel, when it becomes like a nation state, kind of takes on this trickster persona. It's not that it's malicious, it's not that it's evil. It's often the trickster persona gets associated often with those that are small and weak, but somehow still powerful. And so the nation of Israel gets to be the part where their influence is outsized. They're small. They're kind of a backwater nation. If you look, like archaeologists have said, like they did not have the technology that the rest of the world did, but they stubbornly exist for a long time. Other nations get conquered, other nations get obliterated, and somehow this tiny little like kingdom survives. Why? Was the question of how does this nation keep persisting was the bane of a lot of people's thought. Like, why won't the Jewish people just shut up? Why won't they just go away? Why will they not stop? Why do they still, like, that's kind of the Roman Empire. Like, why won't you guys be quiet? Why do you keep revolting? And that's kind of where they get this persona. And even today, a common joke, I was at an event talking to a Jewish friend, and his commentary on the holiday of Hanukkah is like, well, we have a bunch of these holidays. They tried to kill us, they didn't. Let's eat. And that's where it's like, they're not a military. It's not that the Jewish people are very militaristic. They're not Sparta. And they're not like the Assyrian Empire. They don't really have that the best army. So how are they getting ahead?
Okay.
And that's kind of that tricksterness. Yeah, Larry?
Okay,
They're
one
smarter.
thing is, the
Oh.
Jewish people have chutzpah. And somebody
Yes.
asked, well, what's the definition of chutzpah? And
That's
said, well, it's like a guy that's on trial for killing his parents. And he appeals for mercy because he's an orphan.
Right.
You know, they do survive, but they almost didn't. I mean, that, yeah.
And that's happened a few times. There's been many times where the Jewish people were nearly not. And
Mhm.
that's kind of where that rugged resilience, we're going to find a way forward. And so a modern example, to just kind of bring it around, the question, or there's a long time stereotype, and it's not always, there is always like a kernel of truth in a lot of stereotypes, but there's the association with the Jewish people and bankers. And the question is, how did the Jewish people get involved in finance? And the reality was, in a lot of the Middle Ages, the Jewish people were not able to own land. They also got kicked out of a kingdom. They would get kicked out of one place after another after another. There was also a law that said Christian people could not lend money to other Christian people. Mind you, Jewish people are also not supposed to lend money to other Jewish people. This is a commonality that was shared at the time.
Oh, I didn't know Jews can't, they can only lend to Christians or Muslims. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. That's interesting.
It's
So
because
it was a usury. That's how Shylock got in the spot he was in.
so they found a way to survive, and what they found was, if we can't own land, it's better to just have a stash of money. And then they became lenders because Christians kept coming to them asking for loans because they couldn't go to other Christians. But Jews can't take out, or traditionally Jews weren't supposed to take out loans for other Jews. And so this was a symbiotic relationship where the Jews were seen once again as a trickster group because they did what they had to survive. And it turned out banking was a way that they could survive, and they had enough. But then there was a
And it
lot of
was
kickback.
portable.
What was that?
With portable, when they were moved on, they could take their wealth with them. And they created a network all over the Middle East where somebody in another country could borrow from a Jewish lender there and have a debt paid in a different country by a different Jewish lender. There was a network
There
that
was.
worked very well for them once they got it established. But I had always heard that they went into wealth and therefore then into gold and jewelry, and they're portable. Whenever they were evicted from wherever they were, they could take their wealth with them.
Exactly.
then it's held against them.
Hmm.
That's right.
Mhm.
It was held against them.
Oh,
Because they control the money of the world. I don't anymore, I don't think, but that's what people say.
Right. But once again, you can see echoes of Jacob in in even that scenario where
Yeah.
Jacob was someone who was on the move because he was kind of needed to run from one situation to another and then wanted to leave that situation for another. And so his solution was, I don't think I can fight my way out of this situation, so I'm going to outthink my way out of this situation. And that was the same thing that was happening in the Middle Ages. They weren't going to fight the nation or the different kingdoms in Europe, so they worked to outsmart them. And they wanted something portable because they were getting kicked out. They weren't allowed to own land. And you have this scenario, and then it landed them in this thing that they came out on, or a lot of people said, yeah, they found a way and they came out on top. And then the people, that puts us in the position of Laban, actually, of wanting to use them for their services. And then when they got too wealthy, being unhappy and kicking them out. It's kind of the role we filled, or the Europeans filled in the Middle Ages.
yeah.
So we can see how the story echoes again and again and again.
But I'm softening my connotation of what the word trickster means, because I mean, I'm definitely was locked in on Ponzi scheme kind of things. Oh, so that helped. Thanks.
You're welcome.
We think about how the devil interacted with Faust. I can't remember what the story is, but this is in, Middle Ages or something. I don't know. The Faust story, isn't?
I don't know that one.
Oh, okay. Never mind that.
Send me a message. I can look it up or something.
Well, it shows up over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Alrighty. Well, shall we pray us out for today?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Let us go to God in prayer. Good and gracious God, there is a lot of plans that we make, and we hope that we are planning while trusting you. Not planning in case you don't show up, but God, help us to always make plans and trust that you will be with us no matter where we go. We read the stories of Jacob and the way he strove with the humans that were around him, and even strove with you, and our story says that he prevailed. So help us strive in our own life. Help us to wrestle with that we don't understand, and help us be at peace with what we will never understand, and what sometimes we need to apologize for and reconcile with our past and the things that we've done. So I ask that you bless this group for all the things they wrestle with in their minds and all the ways they strive. May they too come out on top. Until we come together next week, God, bless us all in our week to come. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you,
Alright.
Chris.
Thank you. See you
Thanks.
next week.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.